What if the most powerful manifestation technique was never meant to be practiced because it works without effort, not because it is dangerous, but because it removes control? Throughout history, the most effective methods were never the ones that told people to visualize harder or believe more. They were the ones that quietly changed how reality is perceived. These methods rarely survived in plain sight because they made effort unnecessary and authority internal. One of these hidden ideas comes from the work of Jacobo Grinberg. He was not a motivational teacher. He was a neuroscientist focused on consciousness, perception, and the structure of reality. His central question was simple but unsettling. Why does reality shift easily for some people, while others remain stuck no matter how hard they try? His research suggested that reality does not respond to desire or force. It responds to coherence within awareness. This is where the concept later referred to as shadow flipping emerges. It was never designed as a technique to attract something. That alone made it unpopular. Instead of forcing outcomes, it works by reversing perception. Instead of focusing on what you want, it brings attention to what you unconsciously resist. This reversal feels small, almost invisible, yet it has powerful consequences. Grinberg observed that when awareness turns toward what it usually avoids, the inner tension holding reality in a fixed pattern begins to dissolve. When that tension collapses, reality reorganizes naturally, often very fast. This is one reason these ideas were never widely promoted. They cannot be packaged easily. They cannot be controlled, and they make people independent of methods and teachers. In this video, you will learn what shadow flipping actually means, not as psychology or motivation, but as a direct shift in perception. You will understand why most manifestation techniques fail, why effort creates resistance, and why observing what you reject changes reality faster than chasing what you want. We will also explore lesser-known insights from Jacobo Grinberg's work that suggest reality becomes most flexible when awareness is calm and neutral, not emotional or forceful. These ideas were never meant to sound dramatic, yet their effects often are. If you stay until the end, you will see why this approach can feel almost instant when applied correctly, not because something is added, but because something finally stops interfering. This is not about belief. It is about perception. Welcome to Awakened Synchronicity. If you are ready to explore how awareness shapes reality in ways few people ever question, subscribe to the channel and continue this journey with us. Before we talk about the technique itself, it is important to understand who Jacobo Grinberg was and why his work matters. He was not a spiritual influencer or a motivational figure. He was a trained neuroscientist and psychologist who spent decades studying consciousness, perception, and the way the human mind constructs reality. His interest was not belief, but structure. He wanted to understand what happens in the brain and awareness before reality appears the way it does. Grinberg's research focused on how perception is not passive. According to his work, the brain does not simply receive reality, it actively organizes it. What we experience as the external world is the result of an interaction between awareness and an underlying field of information. This idea led him to question something most people never question. If perception shapes reality, then changing perception must also change what appears real. He studied this through neuroscience, psychology, and carefully designed experiments. He examined how attention, expectation, and internal coherence influence what the mind allows into awareness. For Grinberg, consciousness was not abstract or mystical, it was functional. It had rules, and those rules could be observed. A central idea in his work was that reality stabilizes when perception becomes rigid. When awareness is locked into patterns, reality reflects those same patterns back, but when awareness becomes flexible, reality does too. This is not a spiritual metaphor. It is a perceptual mechanism. The brain filters, predicts, and fills in reality based on internal structure. Grinberg believed that many so-called mystical experiences were actually shifts in perception that bypassed these filters. Not miracles, not imagination, but moments when the organizing system of the mind relaxed. When that happened, people reported changes that felt sudden and profound. His work sits at the edge of neuroscience and consciousness research. Not mysticism, it challenges the idea that reality is fixed and independent from awareness. Instead, it suggests that reality emerges through the way awareness interacts with information. This foundation is essential to understand anything that follows. Reality, according to Jacobo Grinberg's work, does not respond to desire. Desire is noisy. It is fragmented. It pulls awareness into the future and splits it away from the present moment. What reality responds to is internal structure. The organization of awareness. When the inner structure is coherent, reality reflects that coherence without effort. When the inner structure is conflicted, reality mirrors that conflict back as delay, resistance, or repetition. This is why wanting something intensely often produces the opposite effect. The wanting itself introduces instability into perception. Grinberg proposed that perception is not a window looking out at a fixed world. It is an active process that shapes what appears. The brain predicts, fills gaps, and stabilizes patterns based on internal consistency. When perception shifts, the predictions change, and when predictions change, outcomes follow automatically. Not because reality is being controlled, but because the organizing system that gives rise to reality has changed. Nothing is forced. Nothing is chased. The reflection simply updates. This brings us to what the word shadow means in this context. The shadow is not negativity. It is not trauma. It is not darkness in a moral sense. The shadow is rejected awareness. Anything that awareness refuses to see, feel, or acknowledge becomes shadow. This includes discomfort, doubt, fear, but also certainty, power, and calm. Whatever is pushed out of awareness does not disappear. It continues to shape perception from outside the center of attention. Grinberg understood that ignored perception is still active. The brain does not delete what is rejected. It suppresses it. Suppressed information still influences predictions, emotional tone, and attention. This is why patterns repeat even when people consciously try to change them. The shadow keeps feeding the same structure from the background. As long as awareness avoids certain perceptions, reality must keep recreating situations that mirror that avoidance. Avoiding the shadow locks patterns in place. Not because the shadow is powerful, but because avoidance stabilizes the internal structure. The brain learns what is not allowed into awareness and builds defenses around it. These defenses consume energy. They create tension, and tension is what freezes reality into predictable loops. The more effort is applied to escape these loops, the stronger they become. This is where normal manifestation methods fail. They assume reality responds to effort. They assume that thinking harder, visualizing more clearly, or believing more strongly will override internal structure. But effort implies lack. It signals to the system that something is missing. Visualization often strengthens the sense of wanting rather than the state of having. The image may be clear, but the emotional signal underneath is absence. Grinberg observed that the field of perception resists tension. Force introduces noise into the system. When awareness strains toward an outcome, the nervous system enters a subtle survival mode. The brain becomes vigilant. Predictions narrow. Flexibility decreases. Reality becomes rigid because perception has become rigid. This is why people often experience temporary motivation followed by frustration. The internal structure has not changed. Only the pressure has increased. The flip occurs when the entire direction of attention is reversed. Instead of focusing on what you want, attention turns toward what you resist. This does not mean analyzing it or fixing it. It means observing it without movement, without intention. without strategy. The moment awareness stops running from discomfort, the internal structure begins to soften. This reversal feels counterintuitive because it removes control. There is no goal in observing resistance. There is no reward promised. That is precisely why it works. When awareness rests on what it previously avoided, tension dissolves, not slowly, often instantly. The energy used to suppress perception is released back into the system. Coherence increases without effort. Grinberg emphasized that awareness itself is regulating. When something is seen clearly, it no longer needs to be managed. Observation integrates what was fragmented. This integration is what allows reality to reorganize. The field does not need instructions, it needs clarity. And clarity emerges when awareness stops interfering with itself. A neurological shift accompanies this process. The brain operates through predictive loops. It constantly anticipates outcomes based on past patterns. Resistance strengthens these loops. Obsession weakens them. When awareness observes without judgment, prediction slows. The brain updates instead of defending. Neural activity becomes less reactive and more receptive. As predictive loops calm, the nervous system exits survival mode. The body no longer scans for threat or lack. Muscular tension decreases, breathing deepens, attention widens. This state is not emotional excitement, it is neutrality. And neutrality is what allows perception to reorganize itself. In this state, reality becomes flexible again, not because something external has changed, but because the internal constraints have relaxed. The same environment begins to respond differently. Opportunities appear without being searched for. Conversations shift tone. Timing changes. These effects feel sudden because the resistance that delayed them has dissolved. Grinberg never framed this as a method to get things. He framed it as a description of how perception functions. When awareness is divided, reality reflects division. When awareness becomes whole, reality reflects coherence. The shadow was never the obstacle, avoidance was, and the moment avoidance ends, the system resets itself naturally, without force, without effort, and without delay. When the shadow is fully seen, something subtle but profound begins to happen. Resistance, which has held patterns rigid for years, starts to dissolve. The energy once spent suppressing unwanted perceptions is released. Coherence within awareness begins to rise, not through effort, but as a natural consequence of acknowledgement. Grinberg described this as the system rebalancing itself. The mind no longer fights its own structure. Instead, it aligns. The internal field, the invisible framework through which consciousness interprets reality, begins to reorganize. It does not require visualization, affirmation, or external effort. The patterns shift quietly internally, yet the consequences ripple outward immediately. As this internal alignment grows, outcomes that previously seemed distant or impossible begin to emerge naturally. These are not coincidences. They are the reflection of internal coherence in action. When the tension of avoidance dissolves, the field is free to respond. Situations that once required striving now appear spontaneously. The timing often surprises people because the shifts happen beneath the surface where no conscious interference occurs. Opportunities that were once invisible suddenly become obvious. Conversations take new directions. Events align in ways that feel orchestrated, yet are merely the natural response of a system unblocked by avoidance. This is why the experience can feel instant. Time, as experienced, is closely tied to internal conflict. When the mind is resisting, when attention is fractured, the formation of outcomes is delayed. The process exists, but it is hidden beneath layers of tension. Once resistance drops, the temporal delay collapses. Manifestation does not start at that moment. It has already been forming in the background. The sense of suddenness is the perception catching up with reality. It is the mind realizing that coherence has been silently reorganizing everything. and the external world is reflecting it immediately. Yet, despite its effectiveness, this knowledge was never widely publicized. Shadow flipping removes dependency on techniques, formulas, and even teachers. It cannot be commodified. There is no step-by-step guide that guarantees results, because the mechanism relies entirely on internal perception, not external action. This threatens traditional systems of instruction and the commercialization of success methods. More importantly, it empowers the individual to observe, adjust, and influence reality directly from within. Autonomy is the natural consequence of this approach, and historically, methods that undermine dependency are rarely promoted. Grinberg also highlighted common mistakes people make when attempting this work. The first is trying to control the process. Shadow flipping is not about manipulating outcomes. Control introduces tension, and tension blocks coherence. Attempting to force results mirrors the very resistance the technique is designed to dissolve. The second mistake is turning observation into effort. Observing the shadow must be passive, non-judgmental, and without expectation. As soon as observation becomes a task, the internal field stiffens. The third mistake is expecting drama. Many assume that confronting the shadow will provoke intense emotion or immediate revelation. Instead, the experience is subtle. Emotional neutrality, calmness, and quiet clarity are indicators that the process is working, not the magnitude of feeling. Recognizing when the technique is effective requires a shift in perception itself. Emotional neutrality is the first sign. The mind no longer reacts compulsively to situations, desires, or fears. Reduced urgency is another. When avoidance drops, there is no pressing need to push outcomes forward. Patience and presence emerge naturally because the field is already reorganizing. Finally, external shifts occur without planning or effort. Unexpected synchronicities, new opportunities, and subtle changes in circumstance indicate that coherence is operating in the world. The reflection of internal alignment manifests outwardly, confirming that awareness is no longer fragmented. Through these observations, it becomes clear that the power of shadow flipping lies not in what is done, but in what stops being resisted. Reality is not persuaded through force or desire. It is mirrored by the internal structure of awareness. The moment the shadow is seen, the tension collapses and the field responds. Manifestation is simply the natural effect of coherence restored. People often overlook this because it is quiet, subtle, and counterintuitive. They expect effort, struggle, and emotional highs. Grinberg's work teaches the opposite, that when the internal system relaxes and observes without interference, the external system adapts instantly. Even small moments of true observation produce ripple effects. A single acknowledgement of avoided feelings can dissolve patterns repeated for years. The internal nervous system, freed from predictive rigidity, begins to operate flexibly. Neural loops that once amplified fear, scarcity, or resistance begin to calm. When these loops relax, attention is no longer locked into defense or anticipation. The mind begins to detect possibilities it could not perceive before. This subtle internal shift transforms the perception of time, opportunity, and outcome. What once seemed distant or unattainable can now appear immediate, as if it had always been forming beneath awareness. Because of this, attempts at manifestation that rely on willpower often fail. They miss the subtle work of observing resistance and releasing avoidance. By focusing on results, people inadvertently strengthen the patterns that hold reality rigid. Shadow flipping works precisely because it bypasses willpower, effort, and control. It invites observation and integration. Awareness becomes whole, and the field mirrors that wholeness. The process is self-sustaining, independent of belief, ritual, or external validation. It is the alignment of perception that produces tangible outcomes quietly and efficiently, without requiring any dramatic intervention. Even repeated practice confirms the same principle. The more attention is given to observing what was previously avoided, the more coherence grows. With coherence, the nervous system relaxes further, the brain's predictive loops become less defensive, and external shifts accelerate. Manifestation is no longer about timing or striving. It is about noticing, integrating, and releasing. Gradually, individuals recognize that the instantaneity of results is not magic, but a natural reflection of alignment. This is why those who understand shadow flipping rarely rely on external techniques. They are already operating at the level of internal authority, where awareness itself guides reality. Patterns in life that once seemed stubborn begin to soften. Conflicts that felt unavoidable start resolving themselves. Situations that appeared static or rigid now flow naturally. These shifts are often subtle, but unmistakable. The indicators are always the same: a sense of calm, diminished urgency, and effortless alignment between internal awareness and external circumstances. The field is no longer constrained by resistance. It responds freely to the observer, who sees without judgment. By recognizing these signs, the practitioner begins to understand the mechanism at work. Emotional neutrality signals reduced tension. Absence of urgency signals coherence. Subtle external changes signal that the system has reorganized. Grinberg emphasized that the effect is rarely dramatic in appearance, but profound in impact. The mind learns that reality is responsive, not because of effort or force, but because internal alignment has been restored. The shadow, once avoided, now participates in perception. Resistance no longer dictates patterns. Outcomes unfold naturally, often faster than the observer expects. Ultimately, the process reveals the hidden principle of shadow flipping. Manifestation is not about creating, it is about releasing. It is about observing what has been avoided, allowing coherence to increase, and letting the field respond. The signs of success are subtle yet unmistakable: calmness, clarity, reduced tension, and spontaneous external alignment. Grinberg's work demonstrates that reality does not require struggle. It only requires that awareness stop resisting itself. When this occurs, results are no longer delayed. They are immediate, flowing naturally from the coherence now present within the internal system. Reality is not shaped by how much we want something, how hard we try, or how forcefully we push. It responds not to effort, but to coherence. The moment we stop resisting, the structure of our awareness aligns naturally, and the world around us reflects that alignment. This is the essence of shadow flipping, a reversal of perception, where the focus shifts from chasing outcomes to observing what we have unconsciously rejected. By noticing the shadow, the hidden aspects of our awareness, we dissolve the tension that holds patterns in place. We stop feeding resistance, and the internal system reorganizes itself. The field of reality responds quietly but powerfully, producing shifts that often feel instant, because the underlying formation of events has already been occurring beneath the surface of conscious attention. Manifestation in this sense is the reflection of inner alignment, not the result of forceful intent. Jacobo Grinberg's work reminds us that awareness is the agent of change. When we stop pushing, controlling, or trying to manipulate outcomes, we allow the natural intelligence of perception to operate. This does not require magic, ritual, or complicated techniques. It requires clarity. It requires neutrality. It requires the willingness to see what has been avoided without judgment or effort. In observing without interference, the nervous system relaxes, predictive loops in the brain calm, and the mind becomes receptive rather than reactive. In this receptive state, reality is free to respond. Opportunities, circumstances, and outcomes that once seemed distant or blocked begin to appear naturally. The results are not forced, they are mirrored expressions of internal coherence. For the next 24 hours, I invite you to experiment with this principle. Notice the moments when you feel resistance toward emotions, situations, or thoughts, and instead of avoiding or pushing them away, simply observe them. Allow yourself to witness what has been previously ignored without judgment or expectation. Let awareness rest on these shadows with quiet attention. Do not try to change anything. Do not try to achieve anything. Simply notice. Observe how the tension begins to dissolve, how clarity grows, and how perception begins to shift. Pay attention to subtle changes in your environment, in conversations, or in events that arise effortlessly. These are the reflections of your inner alignment manifesting outwardly. As you do this, remember that manifestation is not about adding more effort. It is about subtracting resistance. It is about creating space within awareness for coherence to emerge. The moment awareness integrates what was avoided, reality responds automatically. The flips and shifts may surprise you with their speed, because what was already forming beneath the surface is now permitted to emerge. It is not magic. It is the natural response of a system operating without interference. The clarity and calm you cultivate today will continue to influence tomorrow, reinforcing the principle that the internal state of your awareness is the true determinant of what unfolds in your life. If you found this explanation helpful and insightful, make sure to like this video. Your support helps us continue sharing Jacobo Grinberg's groundbreaking work and consciousness techniques with more viewers. And if you want to continue exploring how awareness shapes reality, subscribe to Awaken Synchronicity. By subscribing, you join a community of seekers dedicated to understanding perception, coherence, and the subtle ways reality mirrors what we allow into awareness. Embrace the practice of observing quietly for the next 24 hours, and notice how reality responds when resistance falls away.